to the Galileo Ventures podcast, and an extra big welcome to Season 2, Episode 1.
Yay.
I'm here with my co-host, Hugh.
Hello.
I'm James. We are two VCs, serving up insider insights and hot takes on the latest technology news you won't find anywhere else. In this episode, we're going to review the latest seed funding data. We're going to interview two experts, Claire Thompson and Toby Eggleston, on startup fundraising and the current fundraising climate in Australia, as well as comparing it to the US. And we're going to discuss if we should all get AI friends. Are you excited, Hugh?
Very excited.
Let's dive in to Episode 1, Season 2. But before we get going, very quick shout out. We're proudly sponsored by Herbert Smith Freehills, one of the world's leading law firms. HSF regularly represents the top founders and investors with deep expertise across startup lifecycle from investment to exit. If you're interested in learning more, head to galileo.lol/HSF and you can see more. But we are going to talk a lot about that in the upcoming podcast and episodes, and we're very excited to have them on. So thank you very much for sponsoring us and being the first sponsor. You can never get rid of that title. Moving on to our first section. This is our new section for our podcast fans. Welcome to Grit or Quit, where we call out the boldest startup moves. Do they show grit or should they have quit while ahead? In this episode, we ask if 21-year-old founder Avi Schiffman, who is creating one of those AI pendant things that you hang around your neck and has conversations with you as you go about your daily life, should he have spent 1.8 million of his company's 2.5 million pre-seed funding round on buying friend.com for his business?
I mean, look, I'm not sure about these. I mean, we talk about AI-related companions momentarily. I think that the importance of having the .com domain in 2024 is now pretty minimal. I think every AI company now uses the AI domain for one thing. But I think that it's one of those things of you can always acquire a .com later on when you have a whole bucket of money, everything else. But in terms of the early launch...
Okay. Quit for Hugh. Is that right? You're
Quit
voting
for
quit.
Hugh.
I'm going to vote other way around. Grit. I think it shows grit. And this is because, and people that know me will know this, I'm a very big believer in your domain name being your property, and I believe good domain names can help propel your business in the early days. However, there's a caveat to my crit. Do I think you should have spent 1.8 billion of your 2.5 billion on a domain name? Not sure. But it is a bold move, and for that reason, I think fun. It's very 2021.
True, it's very 2021.
But, as an entrepreneur who's much more experienced than me has told me, who's had many exits, sometimes when you own a domain like that, the most valuable thing of your business when you wind it all up is the domain. If it's a failure in 5 years, what do you think friend.com will be worth then? Even more. In terms of IP and assets, who knows? The pendant, I don't know if that's going to go anywhere, but there we go. Thank you very much for that vote, Hugh. Let us know your thoughts. We're going to have a little poll on this episode. Grit or quit, do you think it was a good move to buy the domain, or do you think it was a bad move? You can vote on Spotify. Moving on to our next section, which is AI friends. Hugh, take it away.
I thought this was an interesting one because it's sort of been the talk of the internet for a little while. But with particularly the advent of iOS 18 having just come out a week or so ago, alongside the iPhone 16 collection. But one of the features that had been rolled out there is that thing that many apps, and like probably most recently Clubhouse, I guess, use to kind of, I guess, bootstrap that early part of the how do you find the people you know on social networks, is that they used to have that feature where you could synchronize your entire contact book and just give it to the app, right? And then they could obviously match on phone number to work out who you may or may not have known. They've made some changes so that now you essentially have to select, which people, which contacts you're going to share and things like that, rather than it just being here's the entire list, right? Yep. And Nikita Beer, who's a sort of, I guess, well-known founder, I guess now investor, in that consumer app space made TBH and Gas, both sort of, I guess, sort of teen type age social networks, has pretty much said, oh yes, this is probably the end of any new social app. This is going to so strongly solidify the incumbents because of the lack of that capacity to transfer that sort of social graph. Like it's impossible to get a social graph out of any of the platforms these days in a way that's going to be, I guess, cross-compatible for another vendor, for better or worse. There's obviously legitimate privacy reasons to argue for, and there's competition reasons to argue against, and there's separate consumer rights issues to argue probably both for and against. But I think the interesting part is that social AI apps are thriving. And really, I think the early start of these were the AI girlfriend, like the girlfriend ChatGPT type thing that you can just sort of like chat with, and who you can
Character AI, which we
character
know
AI, you're correct.
unofficially, 70 to 80% of its traffic is AI girlfriend stuff.
Yep. And with the advent of some of the better, I guess, generative AI and things like that, maybe they'll be able to exchange photos with you and things like that as well. I don't know. Like, I personally don't have an interest in having an AI partner in that capacity. But then most recently, about 10 days ago, was the app Social AI. And Social AI, the concept is it's a social network, like every other social network that you can imagine, but you have no actual real followers. Your followers are all AI bots, and you can select the type of AI bots. Are they going to be supportive? Are they going to be cynical? Are they going to be everything else? But the idea is you sort of like, you post stuff and then you get tons and tons of comments. You get all of the engagement, you get all of the, backwards and forwards, everything else.
Yep.
Except of course it's totally AI generated, and you're essentially just yelling straight into the void. James, the question here is this a good thing? Or is this sort of like the start of the end of the internet? Which, certainly to show my age, the best parts of the internet were the early days of, Usenet forums and those kind of places and Twitter. There's a lot of people I know now as a result of people who I sort of, I guess, met on Twitter who were strangers. Is this the end of that part of the internet?
That's a very big question. Is this the start of the end? Many people would agree with you here that this is the start of the end. And what does this mean? Not just for your internet friends, but just real life relationships.
Yeah.
which is a concern. I think this is a case of history repeating itself. As they say, history rhymes. History doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes. Or whatever that saying is. Nailed it, yeah. And I think this is going to be a new thing. So I think it's going to be new in the sense that having internet friends was new, and people didn't necessarily agree that internet friends were real friends in the very beginning. And to a certain degree, some parents that really don't like their kids being on the internet still think that, right? Even today. But I think for the most part, most people see the positive benefits of social interactions online via games or forums. And so I think the question becomes, what are the possible positive social side effects of having AI companions, whether they're people commenting on a Twitter thread or a social media post, or whether they're, social companions for your anxiety, right? For people that suffer anxiety or people that need counseling. What are the positive benefits and what are the negative benefits? And I think there's going to be net positive. There'll be net positive benefits, like in terms of after everything, we consider. However, I don't know if we know what the ramifications are just yet. So I think it's going to have to play out. Do I think it's negative? No. Do I think it's the end of the internet? Yes. And what I mean by that is internet as we know it today. Has anyone coined internet V2 yet? 2.0? Has that been a thing yet? I can't remember. But whatever the internet we know today, which is you go on a web browser, you type in a URL, that's going to go. It's the end of this. And I think what the next version is going to be is, we're not sure, but it's going to be something much more natural. And you're going to have a conversation and things are going to come to you. Do I think web pages will still exist? Yes. Do I think you're going to stop typing URLs in? Yes. And as a result, do I think that social apps will incorporate this AI thing? People? Yes. How is it going to do that? I don't know. Is it going to be just comment threads? I don't know. It's kind of fun, But my guess is this app will kind of die in 6 months. I think it's going to be a fun app. That's a fun experiment. Do I think it's going to get product market fit? I'm not sure. But all I can say for the listeners is I tried an AI companion app about 2 years ago, pre-GPT launch. It was the companion app in the one built out of Brisbane. What's it called? Replica, which to this day is still probably one of the most popular ones globally. And it was really about having a virtual girlfriend, boyfriend, partner. Like it really lent into that heavily. And I got to say, I wrote a post about it that I never published, but I should publish it now in context of what we're seeing today. And I think it was really interesting to sort of go reflect on what are the positive benefits of this, and what are the parts where it kind of just breaks down and you're just like, oh, this is clearly not a real relationship. All I'd say is I don't think AI friends will replace real friends, but I think we got to work out where they sit on the stack of, friend stacks. And I think they're net negative? No. I think that's really silly when people go, this is the end of humanity. And I'm reading a book right now, which is talking about that, which is Yuval's new book, Nexus. I don't know if you've come across that yet, Hugh. Yuval Harari.
I haven't watched it, but
I'm in deep in halfway through. It just came out last week, and I got to say it's really interesting. Maybe we'll talk about that next podcast episode. But he really talks about information networks and what happens when a lot of it is generated by AI. And I think that's a really interesting question that this leads to.
And I think the follow-up, I guess, piece to this that I'm curious about is, with like some of these sort of leading apps in this world growing like crazy. Like you look at the MAUs, DAUs, retention data, like wild, proper, really, is this the next Facebook, in the heady days of Facebook, back when, there was Farmville and everything else.
The fire hoses of Facebook. What a day.
Yeah, those days, right? The really early days. Yeah. As a fund, would you invest in it?
Oof.
It's definitely a momentum bet, right? You could say absolutely from a VC's perspective, it's a momentum bet. The retention's good. The MAUs, DAUs are good. In fact, the monetization, if you treat it like a consumer game, the monetization is surprisingly good.
Would I invest as a fund?
But would you invest?
I don't know the answer to that because I have problems with the question of generally, would you invest in anything that's growing? The question, would you invest in anything growing? No, I wouldn't invest in anything that's growing. Do I think it's a dumb investment? No, I don't think it's a dumb investment. Would you invest?
I don't know. I mean, it's, I think I always go back and again, I don't know if I'd necessarily invest for other reasons. And I won't say ethical is probably the wrong word, but I think a little bit the same here of like with AI girlfriends and things like that. There's a bit of that sort of ick factor that starts to step in. Is this kind of going to be the new generation of those sort of pickup hustler, griftery people, that sort of generate that very strange like mentality towards, usually it's towards women. And I wonder if there's a bit of ick factor that I think would make me resist this a little bit. But if you look at, for example, one of Australia's rarely spoken of, I guess, startup success stories is VGW, Virtual Gaming Worlds, over in Perth, who run a series of effectively kind of, I guess, worked out some ways to get around a few of the gaming-related laws in some US states. That's the, I guess, Financial Review story. Yep. The company would have, I'm sure, a different story. But minting money. Yeah. I guess like many/most gambling companies, minting money. And, LMCT, I see a lot of TikTok ads, same sort of thing, sweepstakes type stuff, like all of that kind of gaming adjacent things, again, grow like crazy. And part of you as a VC goes, shit, you want to have a few of those things in your portfolio.
Well, I mean, I agree with that. You want things that grow because in the end, VC investing is all about big outcomes. So I agree on that premise. What I would push back on is this idea that VCs only go after stuff that grows and has momentum. Because I feel like there's dumb investing and there's investing where you have a thesis. I think you got to have a thesis regardless of whatever the growth looks like. And for example, live example, we said no to a recent AI company. They were technically pre-launch. They had 3,000 users. They hadn't done any marketing. And remember, clearly you said no because you were worried this would just contribute to spamming, right?
Yeah. And I think the interesting part for me was I remember talking to someone recently about who's been using one of those many sort of LinkedIn plugins that are very unofficial and not overly, I guess, embraced by LinkedIn, but are, I'm sure, very commonplace. I hate LinkedIn as an end user personally, but was talking to you how they'd used one of those new things that it GPT generates all of your LinkedIn posts. And I'm like, oh my God, can you imagine the GPT generated LinkedIn posts? But then it also, comments on other people's posts on your behalf and, all that kind of stuff. And they were talking to me about how amazing it was that oh wow, they've gotten so much more engagement and, my LinkedIn's, totally blown up. And I'm like, but do you not think and realize that maybe all of the people responding to your ChatGPT or GPT generated posts are other people's GPTs in the same way you're responding to all of their GPT? Is this just like a sort of Ouroboros of, LLM shit going in circles?
Yeah. AI talking to AI, spam generated spam bullshit. Yeah.
And how much use is that? And they talked about it in that sense of great pride, great joy, look at my wonder. And I'm like, but is this real? We went through in the early days of social networking and social media marketing of, does this actually generate useful anything?
Is this educating the world and providing valuable information that allows people to learn and or understand something a bit better? And I really struggle to see if the answer is yes there. I think it's questionable. I agree with you on that. I agree with you on that front. Yeah. I think it's tricky. Is this the end of the internet? What do you think?
Look, I think it's going to be interesting to see how all of the incumbent social networks, X/Twitter, LinkedIn, Pinterest, I guess even, there's some really good Twitter accounts of AI generated slop of some of the stuff that are clearly AI generated images and things like that just get insane amounts of views from presumably boomers, or maybe it is also GPTs all,
My favorite ones are the generated Jesus images and Jesus in various other forms. That's just an incredible experiment of boomer liking on Facebook, boomer spam on Facebook. It's amazing.
Yeah. And part of me is it's going to be really interesting to see what that means for engaging on the internet.
Yeah.
In the marketing world, we talk a lot about what does the advent of, GPTs and GPT generated content mean for, writing marketing content, and how do you differentiate it? If everyone's using a GPT, even with some RAG and some customization on, brand and tone of voice or whatever, it's all going to the content's all going to asymptotically reach the same point, right? It's going to keep doing that. And what does that mean for branding and marketing and cut through and I think it's a really good question.
We already see it now. I mean, the monoculturism of pop music is classic example. It's becoming very American centered, and which is I think a bad outcome, but it's a good point. And it's a very interesting question. So social AI, I think we both would agree with it. Is the start of the internet? Possibly. Start of the end? Possibly. Is it necessarily bad? Not sure. I think we've got to work out what this becomes. And like with everything that grows, back to your question, would I invest in this? I think in the end, you got to think about what's the business that comes out of this. And I don't know if there's a business that comes out of the social AI app.
I mean, again, the other side is if it gets a whole lot of traction, there's good history in
Can you figure
all
it out?
social apps for much of working out how to do these things.
Yeah. What would your tips be to AI founders here?
Oof.
Are there any tips to glean from this? Grow crazy? Ask questions later?
Yeah, I don't know. I think my tips would be to just work out what you're doing that's really unique. There's this interesting balance, I think, in this space of doing the things that you need to do in order to just kind of get the users in or get things through the door. But I always like to sort of quiz and understand founders. It's that vision-y piece of just where is the magic going to come from, and what's that piece of not to do the whole the quote misattributed to Henry Ford of people would say that they want a faster horse. what is that magic that you're bringing into the product that's going to make it special and unique? And I think that's where the ones in this kind of category that will have longevity, I think, will come from that sort of world.
I agree with that part. Yeah. What's your vision? Can you articulate it? In fact, if we think about the founders we backed, every founder we back has a very strong vision, and they have ability to articulate it. And I saw a post from Sam Altman recently as well, who made a similar comment, which was, of all the founders he's backed, for some reason, it's always the really successful ones always have that ability to articulate a vision really early on and in 20 words or less. And he doesn't know why that's the case, but they do, and it's so crystal clear. And it's interesting when we think about the founders we say no to, and our founders that we've backed, the ones that can do that, and how they talk about it really quickly is really interesting as well. So yeah, I think it's a very strong signal. I agree with that. Very strong signal. Moving on to the next topic, we are going to talk about a big question on a lot of founders' minds and a lot of investors' minds too, which is, should founders raise their funding round, or not raise their funding rounds? And the context of this is, it has been a tough year for founders to raise money. Just ask anyone. People are not hitting their funding goals. People are not getting the valuations they want. And there's less money being deployed. If we just look at the data, in Australia so far, as of June, there's been about $2.3 billion deployed across 150 deals. This is significantly down from previous years, specifically 2021, 2022, which were obviously the big post-SERP years. However, it is ending up a little bit higher than 2023 and a little bit higher than 2020. And so that's the probably positive side. If you look at the USA, it's orders of magnitude more, but it's the USA. It's 93 billion deployed, but significantly less volume of deals. So what does that mean? It means OpenAI raising whatever it raises, 5 billion, is dominating most of that. So very few deals, very few large deals happening, and the rest is very, very, very small. What does that mean for founders? Well, it means that if you're raising a Series A, B, or C, good luck, no one's giving you money. If you look at Series C in the US, it is down 50%, 54%. If you look at Series Seed, it is up 54%. So you've literally got a complete reverse, right? What was second order effect? Everything is a bridge round. So everyone's raising series, pre-A, seed plus, seed 1, seed 2. I've even seen a C3, which is just crazy. Also, you've got the macro environment, which is interest rates up, which means risk off. So this is generally across every asset class. What does that mean? If you're a deep tech company, good luck raising money. If you're an enterprise SaaS company, a bit easier. If you're AI, well, it's 2021 still, So the question is, should founders raise now, grow their business, hire more staff, all the good stuff that comes with raising capital that you can then deploy on building the business? Or should they hold off, right? Which is typically what that means is either laying off staff and or keeping the same headcount, slowing down because you can't get your product for features out there as fast as you need to, which therefore means you can't unlock more customers, which therefore means you're not growing as fast. And what do you think about that, Hugh? What's your answer to founders? If we're on the call now, what do you think the answer should be?
Look, it's hard. And I think we're definitely in this situation at the moment of where we haven't really gotten like the mismatch of expectations, I think, hasn't flown through. It hasn't sort of flowed through.
Totally.
And I think when I talk to founders and also other investors in the space, like one of the interesting things I think is that the deals that are being executed, like we, as VCs, we see a lot of those terms of what actually ends up getting executed. And it's interesting seeing at the moment still a very big disconnect between the expectations of what VCs have of what is currently quote unquote market in terms of, what valuation you would see for the degree of traction that a company has compared to what founders are and compared to what founders have. And I keep saying that it feels like it's sort of like founders still live in 2022 era, and they haven't quite like sort of, I guess, they're still in the zero interest rate, policy environment.
Especially pre-A founders, right? Pre-seed, seed. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas, and a lot of that is, to be fair, like you look at a lot of the news articles and things like that, and, they say this and they say that. And, I can see how founders end up sort of anchoring themselves that way. But the challenge is on the other side of the table, you see a lot of how these things actually work in reality, and I think there was a piece in Capital Brief, which is sort of like the, I guess, I don't know, probably trying to be the information for Australia, I guess.
Something like that.
Like
or the Axios.
Yeah, Axios kind of thing, tech news. But there was a big piece in there about the most recent, I think it was the safety culture raise.
Yep.
That everyone got a bit, I guess, snarky about because, they raised 645 million or something, but, 200 of that was secondary sales, 50 of that was actual equity investment into the company and new share issuance, and, the balance, whatever it is, another 200 or so was debt, right? And, should you be saying you've raised 600 at a 3.5 billion valuation when you've actually raised 250?
Yeah.
You've sold 200 worth of shares from, employees, everything else, which is great, but that probably will be at a big discount unless they converted those share classes into, the same share classes as the most recent raise. But usually that's at a big discount to what the sort of, I guess, headline valuation is. And the rest is debt, and there's a combination here of where there needs to be a change in the I guess, media approach, but also, founders see those things and they go, oh, but like, raising 600 million, look, they can raise 600 million. Although they kind of really haven't raised 600 million.
No, that's right. They haven't. And also when founders we also got to keep in mind that a business at that scale raising right in this market is so unusual. So for them to be able to raise, they have to have a lot of traction. They have to be growing very well.
Or the terms can be very onerous. Is the other side.
We don't know what the terms are. We know it's a slight down round. We know it's not.
That was what was reported. Yep.
Yeah, and we know that. And so I guess the question, the flip side would be like, let's look at the negative side, which is this is a down round and this business is still growing really fast, right? And the other one they use that I've had used at me is look at OpenAI. It's raising 5 billion and whatever 150 billion valuation. I'm like, yeah, but like exception to the rule.
Yeah.
And also, it is growing very fast. Is there a long-term moat? Who knows? But
been around for a decent while, so
yeah, that's right. Has been around for decades, so people forget that. Look, I think I agree with you. Mostly, it's tricky. Although I'm not sure if I got an answer out of you. What would your yes or no answer be, or is it a maybe depends?
I think it's a maybe depends.
Yeah, I think it's a maybe depends, which is what we've been telling our founders, right? There's no binary answer in this. You can do whatever you like, right? It's your business. You can decide. We have had founders, if I think about our experience, we have founders that have said, no, let's delay to next year. And that's probably a really good outcome. Like this specifically, if you're in consumer and you're not in hot sectors right now, we have had founders that have raised. And if I think about it, we've got one deep tech founder now raising really solid term sheet, really good valuation uplift. So that's a great story, right? And hopefully we can talk about the pod when that's all done and dusted and they've announced it. But that's going to be an interesting story. So I think we could see both good and bad. All I'd say is to sort of bring this discussion in a little bit to some tips for founders. And I'm pulling some of this from a recent post I did as well, but I thought it's good to sort of just talk about on the pod. I think my tips for founders would be your growth. Capital efficiency is very much king again. So I think being capital efficient, there's nothing wrong with it. And if that means you're slightly slowing down, that's fine, right?
Well, I mean, I think rule of 40 still somewhat applies, though.
Correct. Yeah, it does. But like equally, if you have to survive, you have to survive. So I think capital efficiency is king. Even if you have lots of money and even if you are growing, being capital efficient is still very important. I would say growth rates over total revenue is more important in my book. So I think if you're growing fast, even though if your revenues are small, that's fine because ultimately VCs fund growth. However, caveat, retention needs to be there. And this is kind of where things fall over a bit. Good retention beats really fast growth. Hopefully you have both fast growth and retention, and capital efficiency. You got all three, right? What's it? Pick two of three. And the other thing I'd also say for founders raising pre-seeds, we know small pre-seed rounds are good. So sub 1 million, and we can look at the data. If you look at the Carter data, pre-seed rounds below $1 million, there's way more of them happening than pre-seed rounds above 1 or 2, which kind of get into the seed of like the staging piece where it's some of them called seed, some of them called pre-seed. But regardless, we know that's the case. So it's other tip to founders. If you have any stories about raising this year, or if you have any comments on that, 2 topics we've discussed today, feel free to send them through to us. Our email is team@galileo.ventures. Hugh and I read them. And otherwise, we are going to move on. Moving on to our guest interview, we are interviewing 2 experts diving into the fundraising climate a little bit deeper from the perspective of people that are actually executing, running these rounds, and in fact representing some of these founders, especially at the larger scale as well. We're going to talk to 2 experts, Claire Thompson, who is partner at Herbert Smith Freehills in their venture capital division, and Toby Eggleston, who's also partner at Herbert Smith Freehills, but on their partner tax side, so M&A, tax, liquidity, all the good stuff on the exit. And we're going to talk about startup fundraising and the climate for Aussie founders in particular. We'll let them take it away. Okay, over to the segment. Welcome to the Galileo Ventures podcast. For this section, we are joined by 2 great guests who are also our very first sponsors. So thank you very much to our first sponsors. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, James. Thanks, Hugh. Pleasure to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Before we get into things, it'd be great to have a quick introduction from both of you. Tell us a bit about your background and why you're doing what you're doing.
Sure. So I co-head our venture capital practice for Australia, and I'm also an M&A lawyer. I work with founders from idea through IPO and beyond, but the reason I do it is because I find it really energizing working with entrepreneurs, to be honest. I love the passion that they bring. I love being able to help them on the journey and see them grow and develop through multiple raises and stages of their companies.
Thanks, Claire. And Toby, how about yourself? Tell us a bit about you.
Thanks, James. Tax partner at HSF, have been working with the sort of startup ecosystem for quite a while, was heavily involved in drafting and assisting the government and then the ATO in drafting the employee share plan rules and standard form docs that came in 2015, and have acted along the way at various stages. But it's very interesting and, as Claire said, energising working with young entrepreneurs in helping them develop new businesses.
Now, we'll jump into our first topic. But before we do, Hugh, did you want to ask anything?
Well, I think for our viewers, those who are listening, the audio-only version are missing, of course, the most valuable part, which is the facial reactions, but also the work-from-home backgrounds, in that we would like to highlight that the machine in the back of Toby's video is not a guillotine, and we're advised that it is actually a rowing machine. So just for those who have the extra joy of watching us via the video format, you get that extra little, tidbit cookie.
Rarely used.
Really?
Isn't that what all home fitness machines are about? Something,
Exactly.
Peloton,
Yeah.
So for our first topic, we wanted to cover startup fundraising for our listeners. Given that both of you have been involved in a lot of different startup transactions, a lot of different aspects of corporate law, I thought it'd be awesome to get some tips for the founders and some of the investors that listen to the podcast. First question, or what I'd like to ask is, based on what you're seeing, tell us about the fundraising climate in Australia this year and what founders and investors should be aware of.
I think it's no surprise that the market is still taking its time to fully recover, perhaps back to the highs of 2020, 2021. Whether we'll ever get there, I'm not sure. But we are seeing plenty of activity still. I would say the majority of activity that we're seeing is kind of at the seed stage and then at the later stage. Anecdotally, we've heard that it can be pretty hard to get a seed round together. A lot of founders are finding it really tough to find a lead, but deals are happening. They're just taking a lot longer than people expect and can sometimes be a bit more of a party round or a bit more of an effort to bring the round together rather than finding that big blockbuster lead who's going to take out more than half the round. So we are still seeing deals happen, but they are a bit trickier to pull together. At the other end of the market, we are seeing some activity with larger companies undertaking probably more complex transactions. So things like large-scale secondaries or founder sell-down, M&A as well. So we are seeing activity there. What we're not seeing a lot of at the moment is that sort of blockbuster Series A or Series B that might have been a bit more prevalent over the last few years. We are seeing a few deals get away, but it's certainly a lot harder than it was.
Yeah. Are you finding that Series A has fallen off a bit of a cliff? So anything above Series A onwards?
A little bit. We're seeing people do a lot more sort of bridging or C plus or C1 rounds at the moment.
One.
I wonder whether that, you know, a lot of this is just nomenclature, right? I suspect for many people, though, Series A comes with a lot of expectations around size of your company and what you've achieved, and also, you know, a lot of those sort of milestones. And people don't want to come out and brand their round as a Series A because they don't feel that they're at that level yet. That's certainly, at least sort of anecdotally, what I've heard.
I was going to ask one question for you guys was, what are you seeing as far as competition for deals at the moment?
Yeah.
I mean, there's suddenly obviously been a drop-off, I would say, in the enthusiasm for angels.
Yeah, I was asked this yesterday when I was giving a presentation to some students, and I think probably reflects a lot of what Claire said. Like we get approached a lot for bridge rounds, you know, and certainly to lead a bridge round, everyone is indeed looking for a lead. Feels like everyone will tell you that they're oversubscribed, but no one will lead, and you sort of go, I'm not quite sure it should really work that way. But as we know, Australian VCs in particular, or Australian investors, I should say, you know, can be a bit like lemmings, and there is certainly a bit of that sort of crowd follow mentality that happens. So we've definitely seen a lot of those bridge rounds. Still seeing a lot of new stuff coming in. I would say there's a period where, sort of early in this year, I'd say broadly the quality of the new investments and things that we had coming in was lower than we probably have had in the past. I think there was a period where we see a lot of deals who are like, oh yeah, that's really interesting, and it felt a bit, at least based on our deal flow, like it's sort of maybe a combination of the market quietening off a little bit or the uncertainty flowing through, that we saw a lot fewer exciting looking things. But yeah, I think that's sort of turned the corner, it feels, in the last quarter or so, as it feels like at least there's a little bit more confidence in the market. Albeit we are definitely still seeing a bit of that mismatch of where I think often the founder expectation of round sizing and valuation hasn't necessarily reset as much as the market expectation of valuation and round sizing from those sort of heady days. And so I think there's still a little way to go on the founder side, I think, to realize that perhaps it is indeed not 2021 anymore. And simply putting AI in your pitch deck does not suddenly make you an AI company.
Yeah. I think the only other thing I'd say is we haven't seen, perhaps it's more for Claire, but I haven't seen a huge amount of sort of structured deals with aggressive terms. There was some reporting in the various press about a month or two ago that there have been participating prefs and multiples, or certainly pay to play, Ryan Breslow, Bolt style, but in the US. But I haven't seen that much of it in Australia.
No, we haven't seen it. I don't think I'd expect to see it at startup stage. That's pre-seed and seed and Series A. I would expect to see those aggressive deals in late stage financings where they just don't have enough traction to justify the valuation. And I think one of the things that I've noticed in the US is you've had a huge amount of unicorns that were crowned unicorns. You passed the $1 billion valuation over 21 and 22. The amount of new unicorns crowned in 24 is basically nothing. Apart from a few AI companies, it's zero outside of AI. And so it begs you to wonder then what's happening with all these unicorns that are just sitting there. Some people have started to call them zombie unicorns. Others have wondered when they'll get their valuations redone.
Surely they're horses with, sticky tape to stick the horn on, right?
Well, I think we did some new terminology here, maybe. What do you call it? Horses with sticky tape on them.
Donkeys.
Doesn't quite ring. Donkeys. Yeah, donkeys. But, I think everyone's trying to avoid the revaluation part, so they're happy to take a hit on the multiples of preference stacks. And so I think that's been happening. One of the questions I really wanted to ask both of you, actually, was what are some of the terms you are seeing right now? What do you think's market? Have you seen any terms change, anything that's markedly different from a couple of years ago?
Yeah, I don't think we have really. So I would say the majority of rounds that we see are classic one-times non-participating liquidation preps, especially kind of early stage rounds. The majority of pre-seed, I would say we're seeing is all on safes. And that's perfectly fine. But we're not seeing participating preference. We're not seeing multiple anything above 1 times. We will occasionally see warrant, particularly where there might be a down round scenario or a more complex. But again, I would say that is very much a minority of cases rather than the majority. We have seen a couple of cram down transactions or pay to play type arrangements, but again, that is much more tending towards a distressed situation, really, rather than the norm.
The one other thing that has been popping up is in relation to secondary transactions where the founder or early investor / employees are selling down. There's been a push from the leaders of that round where they're buying the secondary is for those shares to convert into the same class as the primary at the time. That is probably reflective of their awareness of the risk of the valuation drop between ords and prefs. That creates some interesting tensions, obviously, between existing investors, but also some fairly technical tax issues that can crop up. But it has been interesting just to see either that awareness of trying to push for conversion is a bit more prevalent as part of the secondary, or requiring that there be a significant discount on the ords.
And I guess to ask you and Toby as well, in terms of the makeup of investors you're seeing typically in these kind of deals, have you seen a lot of change happen in that?
We are still seeing some of the US funds be active here, but maybe not quite as much as they were a couple of years ago. The big change, the Australian funds are still doing plenty, but the big change I think that we've noticed is a lot of funds out of Singapore coming into Australia.
Yep.
That is because there are a number of funds raised, perhaps to deploy into China, but due to all of the change that's happened there, they've looked further afield for investment opportunities, and Australia worked really well, similar time zone, seen as being quite fertile ground for investment. Peak 16 has done, I think, 2 or 3 deals this year. We've seen Price Suspensions do quite a few as well. Jungle Ventures. Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest change, is really the interest from Asian investors in Australia.
Yeah. I think as the Australian market matures, we're starting to see the global competitiveness of the deals and companies coming out of here increase significantly. And that interest is, I think, a good signal for us to see that a lot of the companies coming out of here are actually competing against companies coming out of Singapore, coming out of the UK or US that are trying to enter this market. And it's great to see that now in this region, there's quite sizable firms.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting lesson for founders, though, insofar as often, certainly the founders that we talk to are looking at US funds as kind of the logical partner and things like that. I would say it's more often that we will actually suggest or guide the founders towards looking at the Asian or the Pan-Asian funds instead of them actually actively doing it in the first place. So I wonder when, maybe as more of those deals get announced and things like that, they'll sort of start to be more of a drive from the founder side.
Are you finding the change in the mix of international VCs coming into Australia this year? Have you seen any changes in that area?
I'd say it's quite consistent, actually. I'd say still the majority of cases, the deals we're seeing are led by an Australian VC, and then probably equal representation between Asian and American VCs, I'd say.
50-50.
Pretty similar.
That's interesting. Yeah. Oh, okay. I would have thought it'd be like 80 US, 20 Asian, but if it's 50-50, that's surprising to me. Next question is, what are your top tips for founders when raising capital?
I'd say probably the number one tip we always give our founders is the deal is done in the term sheet. Make sure you read your term sheet and you negotiate it. There's a lot of jargon in the cap raising space, and obviously investors do it all day, every day. Whereas for founders, if it's their first cap raise, they're probably Googling what is a liquidation preference, and it can be overwhelming, all the jargon. So there's, founder vesting, there are terms in there that actually can bite. So it's important that founders understand what's in the term sheet and are on board with it before they sign. A term sheet obviously can be negotiated and should be negotiated if there are terms in there that are not right. And you should be getting advice at that point in time, because it's quite easy, if you've got a 4-page term sheet, it's quite easy to make minor changes to that document that reflect the commercial deal, and then make sure everyone's happy with it, and then you sign, versus just sign something quickly and think, oh, we'll sort it out in the long form documents. Because although a term sheet might say on the top of it, legally non-binding, actually that represents your handshake deal. That is the basis on which your investor will go and get their approvals. That is the basis on which everyone will draw up the documents. And so if you're trying to reopen the deal in long form transaction docs, it chips away at time, it adds cost, and also it starts to erode the goodwill that you've established with your investor. Although you might have said, oh, we'll work this out later, people might feel that, oh, well, we agreed one thing and now you've come back and you're changing the position. So we always advise founders to really be on board with the term sheet before they sign it. That's really our number one tip.
Although, of course, you don't need to negotiate any Galileo Ventures term sheets. They're all perfect.
There'd be no need, I'm sure. Absolutely. The most founder-friendly terms available, I am sure.
Just like every other VC.
That's right. And I think from there, the next bit of advice I would say is to try to keep your round as simple as possible. The first priced round that you do will generally be the best deal terms that you will be able to achieve. So the way that it works, you've got 3 key transaction documents on any deal. You've got your constitution, you've got your shareholders agreement, and you've got your subscription agreement. Your shareholders agreement is the key doc, really, that will live and breathe alongside the company. And the terms that you put in place in your first round really should be terms that are good enough to last you all the way through to exit. Every time you do a round, they'll be reopened and little amendments will be made. An extra investor will have a board seat, perhaps, or an observer right. They will also want some small change here or there. But if they're set up correctly the first time around, they should be able to be just minor tweaks along the journey. But those tweaks are always going to be things that an investor needs for their own approvals. Those docs are not going to become more founder-friendly as you go. They're only going in one direction. So set it up simply and set it up in a way that is as friendly to the founders as you can muster, and then that will set you in the best stead to try to stick to that position through future rounds.
Great. Thanks, Claire. That's interesting. Good tips. We'll definitely take that to heart in the show notes as well. Toby, do you have any top tips for founders when fundraising?
Speak to Claire or Elizabeth as early as possible. I think we're always happy to have that discussion early on and review a term sheet and provide guidance.
Yeah.
I mean, I got to echo that. I think the amount of founders that we meet that don't ever get someone to review the term sheet and they go, oh, I'll just get the long form docs review. And I'm always like, look, we're not
things come up
lawyers.
as a surprise to them in the long form docs and you're like, well, this was actually in the term sheet. I gotta echo that. I think some founders think the term sheet's just the non-binding handshake that doesn't mean anything, when actually it does mean a lot. When you talk about, I guess, getting a law firm involved nice and early, term sheet stage, everything else, how, other than, of course, picking HSF first, naturally, #sponsored, but how would you as a founder, or how would you advise founders to go about picking, the right law firm for them? And, does that change over time? How does that change? What should that decision matrix really look like? Beyond, as I said, of course, always coming to HSF first.
The advice is simple. Pick HSF. We're the only law firm that you need.
Great advice.
But if we happen to be conflicted or there was some reason that you didn't want to do that, I think the key thing is to choose a law firm that does venture deals and does volume. Really, there's about 5 firms in the country that would apply to, I think. Don't just pick, your cousin's next door neighbour because they went to law school. This is actually really important, and you'll actually save yourself, although you might be walking into a big firm on Collins Street or in Circular Quay in Sydney and think, oh, this feels expensive. If you get lawyers who actually know how to do these deals and do volume, it will save you money because they can do things much more quickly and efficiently than people who don't really know what they're doing. And they'll actually look after you and be able to say to you, don't push that point, all investors need this, this is why, versus someone who might be less experienced, who might have a big fight about something that is just so obvious that every investor will need and is really no disadvantage to a founder. So choose lawyers who've got experience. And if you don't know, ask your founder mates probably who they've used and who they liked. I would say that's probably the best starting point.
And a quick follow-up on that is costing. So one of the things that I think a lot of the founders ask me, they go, oh, how much should this cost? For a pre-seed deal, just general terms, what do you think it should generally cost for a fairly straightforward deal, pushing aside sort of the really complicated ones?
Well, if you're doing a pre-seed safe, and so you don't need to negotiate a shareholder's deed, I would think that should be costing you, I'm guessing, sort of sub 10,000.
Yep.
Well and truly. Probably a lot, sub 10,000 actually. And then for a seed round, it does vary. So the key variables would be how many investors you're bringing in, how many safes did you sign up in your pre-seed round who you're now converting.
In different terms, nothing worse than the stacked safes, right?
Were they all the same? Hope maybe not.
Not these days.
Usually not, yeah.
And, have they all got side letters that are different? We now need to incorporate into the shareholder's deed.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of variability. But for a seed round, and at its simplest, if we're talking 1 to 2 investors, no saves or maybe one to two saves, it could be sort of somewhere in the 10 to 15 area, but you're probably more likely in the sort of 20 to 30K, I would say, for a simple round. And then upwards of that, as soon as you've signed up more than 10 safes, you're into real complex territory. And as soon as you're bringing in more than about 5 or 10 investors, you're into complex territory. So, yeah, it's that complexity that adds cost.
Okay.
The other thing I'd add is the build-up of legal debt that has arisen over the life. The longer you go and have not addressed things, that just tends to add complexity and issues. For example, if we've seen transactions where they already have, because they were doing a share plan early on for their employees rather than an option plan, they already breached the 50 shareholder rule. And so fixing those issues up just adds expense along the way.
That's good tip. I mean, my advice is always to say that you've got to remember that the interests of a wonderful firm like HSF is ultimately getting the bill for the IPO and the very late stage work. We know that Claire and Toby do the early stage work for, I wouldn't say fun. Don't know if I'd ever say that legal work is fun, but I'm not a lawyer. But certainly the business model and incentive is much more stacked around building a relationship with you early such that you'll come to them as a preferred partner later on, which I'm sure that they can attest to many stories in which, that's happened as they've proved along the way, as Claire said.
It's true,
they've been a
Hugh.
good...
Although it might jack up the fees and we've got to sort out these incredibly complex scenarios, it's definitely not what we want to be doing. I'd much rather help you avoid the issues by spotting them early rather than have to fix them later.
Yeah.
But yes, it is very much built around building a long-term relationship.
All right. Thanks, Claire and Toby, for our mini interview on startup fundraising. We will catch you next time. Thanks for listening to another episode of Galileo Ventures Podcast Season 2, well, the first episode, actually. We hope you enjoyed the episode. Please share it to a founder or investor if you think they would benefit today. Finally, give us and subscribe on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
ChatGPT a comment response to James's LinkedIn post.
That's right. Thanks, Hugh. I look forward to ChatGPT comments and emails. Yeah. Both are acceptable.
Preferably in, haiku, Shakespearean sonnet, take a nice form.
What do we give the best creative comment on our LinkedIn post response? What's the award?
I'll put up and those who can't see, a tub of original M&Ms, my current favorite desk snack. I'm doing a little shake.
Nice. Great.
I will Amazon ship a tub of original flavor M&Ms to you for your desk eating pleasure.
Great. There you have it. Our first ever unofficial Galileo podcast competition. The best, most creative ChatGPT and or AI created comment on our LinkedIn post for podcast season 2, episode 1. Will get an M&M bucket delivered directly to the desk, courtesy of Hugh. Thanks, Hugh, for that.
And Jeff Bezos.
And Jeff Bezos, yeah. Thanks, guys. Have a great month and see you back here next month.